Hi. A few years ago, my daughter and I attended her baseball league screening of the 1993 film The Sandlot. It's a coming-of-age story about a group of preteen boys who are learning about life and discover their love of baseball. The film has very few female characters in it, and one of them is a lifeguard that all the boys have a crush on. And in one scene, one of the boys pretends to drown so that the lifeguard will jump in, rescue him, and begin giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. At which point, he grabs her by the head and begins kissing her. Afterwards, one of the other boys' voiceover comes on, and he says, what he had done was sneaky, rotten, and low. And cool, because he had had the guts to kiss a woman long and good. Right then, I realized that these are the types of scenes that are going by, often without our notice or comment, and yet they are the ones that are teaching us and our children about consent. Although as parents and educators and coaches, we were careful to shield our children from scenes of explicit violence and sex, we were still sharing stories of coercion that were somehow supposed to be funny or harmless or admirable. Throughout my career, I have worked as a filmmaker, a film journalist, and a professor. Having spent the last several years studying stories of consent, I believe that there is a key obstacle to our understanding consent better and reducing sexual assault. Although we say no means no and yes means yes, we continue to see and share stories where no means maybe or no means try harder. In short, our stories of seduction are too often stories of coercion. When I say a seduction story, I mean the classic boy meets girl story, but these require more drastic measures: deceit, disguise, degradation, and typically a touch of violence. Let's review this range of sexual experiences. On the one hand, we have yes means yes, which includes consensual sex, mutual desire, and willingness. On the other hand, we have no means no, which includes sexual assault, coercion, and unwillingness. But what I'm suggesting is that we continue to blur the two, and that is what I mean by seduction. Depending on how a situation is read by the participants and by others, a seduction might be seen as persuading a willing participant or coercing an unwilling participant. This pattern exists across the gender spectrum and sexual preferences. And I want to be clear that I don't see seduction as a gray area. I see it more as a yellow, proceed with caution zone. Seduction depicts sex as a conquest, as a hunt between pursuer and pursued. Think of the film 50 Shades of Grey, in which college student Anastasia Steele is seduced by the billionaire Christian Grey. Christian is so obsessed with consent that he actually draws out a very detailed written contract for Anastasia, which she actually never signs. But as part of his seduction, he enters her apartment, he undresses her when she's unconscious, and he sells her car, all without her permission. So many were disturbed when the film screenwriter said that Christian was an old-fashioned and romantic hero. But in fact, the story is not new. Many of you from my generation will probably recall how we all saw or wanted to see the 1986 film 9½ Weeks, specifically for its sex scenes tinged with violence. But it goes much further back than that. There's Shakespeare's The Taming of a Shrew, in which Petruchio breaks down the defenses of Kate, who initially has no interest in Petruchio, or any men for that matter. And to give you a sense of how far back this theme actually goes, we can look at Greek mythology, where the goddess Hera initially turned down Zeus's marriage proposal. So he disguises himself as a bird at her window, and when she lets him in, he rapes her, and then she accepts his marriage proposal. Seduction stories sometimes at first glance can seem perfectly harmless. Think of the television series Stranger Things, in which Nancy's boyfriend Steve takes her nose the way a salesman would. Try harder. She refuses to meet him, so he climbs in her window. She avoids his kiss, so he tries again. Similarly, the way that Tom woos Anne in Parks and Rec is intended to convert her no to a yes. And the vast majority of teen sex comedies, from American Pie to Superbad, depict young men who are obsessed with seducing young women. Such a blurring of consent and coercion is no less unsettling when the gender roles are swapped. Consider how a film like The Graduate simply changes the aggressor to the older female character who pursues her younger, innocent male counterpart. And this has also started to make its appearance in more recent teen comedies like Blockers and The To-Do List, where girls are actively pursuing their own sexual exploits, sometimes without thinking that they need to get the consent of their male partners first. The issue is that this is not just the domain of fiction. 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 men are too. The majority of sexual assaults go unreported. Just to highlight one example, 80% of sexual assaults on female college students between 1995 and 2013 were not reported to the police, according to the Department of Justice. So when we highlight an issue like campus sexual violence by only talking about the black and white situations, we are missing an opportunity to talk about the cases in this yellow zone. One of the issues with sexual consent is that we typically don't obtain it in writing. Maybe some of you do, but in writing, or even verbally necessarily. And so we rely on behavior. We know that this can lead to problems. A common example is that someone's laughter might be seen as consent, but it actually might mean that the person is really nervous and not sure how to say no. Part of the way that we learn to behave is through stories. And stories are not just movies and television. They're lessons at school, they're things that our parents tell us, stories that our friends tell us, and things that we see in the news and media. Any story about sex is also a story about sexual consent. So, what are we learning? Sexual violence prevention coordinator and writer Brad Perry talks about how when he was younger, he learned from friends that seducing girls required loosening agents like drugs and alcohol. It wasn't until a female friend of his was raped and attempted suicide that he realized how similar his own tactics were to those of her rapists. Admissions like these are too few and far between. On the flip side, girls are still too often discouraged from seeing themselves as sexual agents. Because of persistent double standards and slut-shaming, girls are still often responding to the advances of their male partners rather than knowing what they want sexually and initiating it. In my own gender studies classes, I've asked students, what did you learn in sex education and what did you want to learn? And every year it's very similar. What they learned about was sexually transmitted diseases, abstinence, and pregnancy. But what they wanted to learn about was consent, assault, pleasure, and relationships. So I love films, and I'm going to continue sharing them with my children. But when I see a scene that I know is wrong, I'm going to have a conversation with them about it. I also am continuing to seek out stories that are better seduction stories. I know that by changing the stories that we tell, we can change how we think about consent and how we act with sexual consent. Thank you.